Well, good evening, everyone. Can you all hear me okay without the microphone? Okay. We'll use the microphone later on if you have questions. But, pardon? Okay. Well, I'll use the microphone then. I'll pretend I'm Bob Eubanks or something like that. So, welcome to this meeting. Thank you for coming out to hear about the elevator proposal. I'm going to start us with a word of prayer and then turn this over to Ernie to introduce our presenter tonight. Let's pray. God, we thank you for this day. We thank you for this church, for the Church of First Presbyterian Church of Cheyenne and the ministry you've given us. We ask that your Spirit be with us now tonight and in our session meeting as we consider our future, as we consider what we might do in our future. And we ask that you guide us in all that we do. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. Ernie, I'd like to turn it over to you to introduce Randy.
For those of you who don't know who I am, I'm Ernie Berzali, chairman of your Building and Grounds Committee. I think everybody knows me. I think I know everybody here. I don't need to say too much, except that Randy Byers is going to be doing a presentation for a elevator. Then he's going to tell you all about that. So, I mean, I have very little to say here, and I'd just like to introduce Randy Byers from The Design Studio Incorporated.
I have a mic on, so thank you. Okay, can you all hear me? Okay, very good. The presentation tonight really is just the start of a dialogue. We're going to show you some very rudimentary sketches of some options of how an elevator might be fitted into your church. We're going to talk about some of the challenges with that, and you already know many of them. And then we're going to talk about maybe a couple of other options that you might not have considered. There's no decisions made here, and there's certainly nothing final. This is an opportunity for you to give your input, to ask questions, to share ideas, and to inform how we proceed with this project, or if we proceed, quite frankly. But all of you have years and years of experience in this church, and I'm sure you have ideas about how it can be improved in this way, and it'll be beneficial to us to hear your input and to understand your questions so that we can ultimately, hopefully put together an optimum solution for access, vertical access in the church. So what I'm going to show you, and bear with me while I get things going.
The elevator malfunctioned already?
You know, if you push the up button, you can't go down. So, you have a beautiful church on many levels. And between the original church and the addition, the education addition, we really need to connect, if we could, something like 8 or 9 different levels, if you go through and count them all. That's, you know, I think they did that in the Jetsons. You all remember the Jetsons cartoon from the 50s and 60s, and they had the vacuum tube, and that's what we need. So that's our solution. What do you think? Anyway, we're sitting here in the sanctuary, but you came down a ramp here that isn't handicap accessible, by the way. You came up steps from one side or the other, no matter which way you came into the church. If you had gone into the education building, you'd go up a little ramp and some steps, or quite a few steps. I'm sure there was some wisdom when the education building was built as to why it doesn't match up on the levels of the existing church, but it sure is inconvenient in trying to connect the pieces. We did a similar project a number of years ago for First United Methodist downtown, and we connected 5 or 6 levels there with one elevator and then ramp. But I'll tell you, yours is significantly more complicated. And you're going to see 3 options here that begin or try to address the issues. So not only do we have, oops, wrong button. See, still going the wrong direction. Not only do we have first level, but then you have space with fellowship hall and other functions in the basement. Basements in gathering places for people are always a challenge, not only for access, but from a life safety perspective. We get concerned when we start putting a lot of people in a basement. So I want you to keep that in mind as we go through here. And then up on the upper level, even if you got up to the upper level here, you still have steps as you come out the doors there and go across the balcony and go to the other side. So connecting a few of the dots doesn't connect all of the dots. One more time. Okay. Fade in here. There. I'm not being patient enough with it.
Flash for a second.
There it is. Okay. So if you look at this plan, here's the existing building, here's the education building, and the alleyway that's in between. So somewhere in this area is likely the best opportunity to connect the various levels. This plan shows coming in what is existing office space, inserting an elevator that you would come in off of the landing level out here, into the elevator, and then up and out on the opposite side of the elevator. So we've got an elevator that has doors on the back and the front, like in a hospital is the most frequent location that you see that. But you have to keep in mind that we're half a flight, when we come in at this level, we're half a flight from the office level. And even at that, we're not at the same level as this landing at the sanctuary. So we would have to come into the elevator here, up half a flight. We'd be at the office level, and you can see we've taken some of the office to accomplish this, and then down a small ramp to get to the sanctuary level. Okay, everybody following me so far? Okay. With that location, it allows us to get to the basement, because that location that I just showed you in the office allows us to go straight down vertically and land in what is part of the furnace and boiler room right now. So we could come down, get off of the elevator, and come out and be at the fellowship hall level here. Okay? At the second level, it would be a similar insertion, and again, you'd be on the elevator. You would come up to the level of the classroom or the office spaces that are there, and they're not even at the same level. But you would get off at that level, and you would be able to go on up to a landing and a bridge that crosses the alleyway, right, and connects into the education building at that level. So fairly complicated, honestly. Two-sided elevator, multiple stops. I didn't count, but 5 or 6 different stops. A difficult insertion right in the middle of the church, but it connects those levels. Second option is similar in that we would come in off of the landing and form a little elevator lobby here, leave this office intact, still have a two-sided elevator. In all of these scenarios, we need that two-sided elevator because in some cases, we're going to get off into the original building. Some cases, we're going to get off into the education building, and they're never at the same level. Likewise, at the lower level, that elevator would insert right there. We'd have a little elevator lobby and into the fellowship hall at that location. Okay? At the third level, again, you can see it's a little bit further west than the first option, and we get off at that level and we still have to traverse back across a bridge to get to the education building. One of the challenges, or some of the challenges, that are present here that we have to overcome and that we have to talk about, not only are the variety of levels, but even when we get you to that level up there, as I said, in a pure sense, we still haven't provided access, handicap access, to the balcony because there's stairs coming out the door and stairs going back into the room on the other side. So there's restricted access, and this is at the lower level, and I'll show you others, but that lower level has restricted access there, and then even up the stairs here, you have challenges coming up the other side. One of the things that we've talked about, and Ernie's mentioned the trials and tribulations with the kitchen and the grease trap, or the lack of a grease trap, is that your kitchen is really a warming kitchen, right? I mean, that's how you're using it right now. Isn't that true? Yeah. I mean, you can't use it as a cooking kitchen because of those limitations. So we're accessing, we can get an elevator in, but we're using it to access something that probably doesn't function as well as you'd like anyway. The other thing that I'm concerned about in these scenarios is that this building does not have a fire sprinkler system. And in particular, areas below grade, basement areas, that are more than just a small storage room, and yours is quite large, that don't have a fire sprinkler system, become a red flag for the fire department and the building officials, and rightfully so. As we put 100 people or more in the fellowship hall with limited access up stairs on either side and no fire sprinkler system, it starts to raise concern about life safety issues. So I'm concerned that we can do the elevator, but it might trigger an additional requirement to bring a fire sprinkler system into the basement. It can be accomplished, but it's fairly expensive. The elevator is fairly expensive too. We'll talk about cost here in a minute. Another option to consider, it'll fade in for me, is to put the elevator over on the education building. Take out some space there. Again, making connection, small elevator lobby. We're sacrificing some office space in order to do this. It doesn't matter where we put the office. We're going to obviously take out space that you're currently using for another function. But this puts it over on the education building side, and we connect between the buildings at that location. Again, before this goes away, it requires a ramp to make those final connections of those few inches of grade difference that we have. But one of the things that I would have you think about, we can accomplish the elevator. One of those first two options, we can sort out and make a final decision and take your input as to, is the best location here or a little further west, and how do we connect and where are the elevator vestibules? We can make those things happen. But again, I want you to think about the basement area, the functionality of the kitchen, and what I mentioned about the life safety concerns of putting a number of people in a basement that's not fire sprinklered, and I'm afraid the fire department would likely make us fire sprinkler that area. When you have an education building that has some space in it, if you were to bring those functions up out of the basement, make them accessible at grade for the fellowship hall and for those functions, it would also, if you included a kitchen in that scenario, it would allow you to get a proper kitchen to whatever degree, to whatever sophistication you would deem necessary. Some churches work very well with just a warming kitchen, similar to what you've got. Some churches, because of either mission or activities within the church, require a more sophisticated, really a commercial kitchen that's a cooking kitchen and has all of the necessary equipment, hoods, grease traps, etc. So before we take you down the road or down the elevator shaft of putting an expensive elevator in the building, I want you to think about and help me understand your priorities for what you want to connect. If we're connecting all three levels, then the elevator needs to be in this general area, because that's the spot that we can get up and down, and we can make it happen. But it's certainly going to trigger some look at that basement and how you use it and what the exits are, and that it's going to need a fire sprinkler system. And then still, you won't have a cooking kitchen. So, I've given you probably more questions than answers, and honestly, that's the purpose of tonight, is, as I said, to start the dialogue, to get your input, to get you thinking, so that you can give us information and help us understand your priorities, so that we can help you come up with an optimum solution. I think, whoops, that would be the last one. I think the elevator is doable, and the simple thing to do is to say, we'll get into the engineering and figure out exactly over here where we can insert it with the least disruption and the least problem for the offices that we're inserting through, and we'll make the connection in the basement, and away we go. And oh, by the way, there's $100,000 of fire sprinkler system that needs to be included as well. I just need to understand if that's what you think your priority is. Let's talk about cost of elevators, because an elevator, even in a new building, is an expensive proposition. Okay? And in an existing building, literally in the middle of an existing building, it's even more of a challenge. We're currently doing an elevator addition for Holy Trinity Catholic Church over by the old DePaul Hospital. We're connecting two levels. They have a main grade level and then a lower level where their fellowship hall is, but it is more of a garden level than a basement, if you're familiar with it at all. We're doing a very small addition that includes a couple of restrooms as well, because they needed handicap accessible restrooms. We are also doing some air conditioning work in their sanctuary. That project overall is just short of $1 million. Okay? The elevator portion of it is around $200,000. Just the elevator, the shaft, and the associated pieces that go with that. In your building, extrapolating those costs, there we have a fairly simple elevator. 2 stops, doors on one side, That's all it is. It's in a concrete block shaft. Fairly simple, pretty straightforward. Yours has 5 or 6 stops and door on both sides in the middle of an existing building. And looking at costs earlier, I think yours is probably $350,000 to $450,000. Working inside in the middle of an existing building is an expensive proposition. So, now I've made everybody very quiet and with upside down smiles on their faces. Wayne's shaking his head no. But I want us to be realistic and truthful about the cost and the challenges. It can be done, and we would enjoy the challenge, but I want to make sure that we understand your priorities for the project and that we're working towards the optimum solution to address those priorities. So, if your priority is the basement, is getting to the basement, then we're going to look at the need. We'll verify before we jump forward, but the need for a fire sprinkler system and the location of the elevator, in all likelihood, needs to be right in this area in order to connect as many of those points as possible.
What's the difference in cost of like an outside elevator?
It's much less costly. Probably, and I'm going to qualify this, if we could go on the outside of the building, and let's say we could find a spot where we could connect 3 levels, 1, 2, 3. The elevator and associated construction, just a simple little addition, probably $200,000, something like that. The challenge with your building is that this is really the only area where you have the opportunity to connect all of the levels, right? These levels are not the same as these levels. If we could pick one spot, if there was a magic location where we could put an elevator on the outside of the building, and from that elevator you could access everything, that would be the solution. But the problem is it doesn't. We could probably put an elevator right there and access, well, with a little trouble. We could pick a point here to access all 3 of these levels, but we wouldn't be connecting to the other building. Elevators are expensive. You've heard some shocking numbers already. Elevators are expensive, I think, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you're going to want to connect as much of the building as possible when you spend that money. Yes, sir.
With the third option,
Let me go back here.
with the third option, it would connect the 2 in the CE and everything but the basement.
Correct.
And my other question is, since you mentioned remodel the CE wing, are some of those walls removable to make a bigger room?
We've done a very preliminary look. Oh, everybody heard the questions? Okay. We've taken a real quick look at CE building. You know, that's a really interesting building too. It's built really well. I mean, it's all masonry, and with the exception of a couple of locations, it looks like it's in pretty good shape. The challenge is it's just not very flexible. So when you have a change of use, which you've experienced recently in the past couple of years, those brick walls that are beautiful don't move very easily. Now, as near we can tell, we poked around in there the other day, and as near we can tell, most of the partitions are on the interior, not the exterior walls, but most of the partitions on the interior are non-bearing. There are columns and beams The structure is really interesting. It's steel bar joists on part of the building, and then there's actually one location where we found a cast-in-place concrete beam. I'm not quite clear as to why that made sense when they did it, but it looks like some of those partitions could be removed. Okay? Now there would be columns. There are columns. You can kind of see the pilasters in the walls, and it's not quite as intuitive as to the column layout as you would generally find. But most of these partitions in here could be removed. And again, I want to give you options and help you think about opportunities. I'm not trying to dictate any particular direction to you. But if you were to utilize this in a different way, what if you took some of this area in the back, which is at grade, and turned it into a kitchen that had access off of the alley and access off of the parking lot, and took this area up here and maybe removed those partitions? You wouldn't have a fellowship hall as large as is in the basement, but close, and maybe there could be, there's certainly room for an addition if that's what you desired. That building, again, is a real interesting anomaly. It's built really well, unfortunately. The easiest thing, honestly, to satisfy your current needs is to get rid of a 1960, whatever it was, I don't remember the exact vintage, 63 building, Ernie, that doesn't quite meet your current needs or your future needs. And I think that's part of what you have to think about. And Reverend Bob and the leaders of the church, I would ask that you think about not only today's needs, we need an elevator to connect from here to there, but about future needs. How are the ministries and missions of the church going to evolve over the next number of years? And how should we set up the church facility to help support those ministries and missions? Is this perfect and we ought to just put the elevator in and be done? Or does it have some shortcomings that we ought to address before we spend $250,000 on an elevator? So those are things that I'd like for you to think about. Other questions? There's got to be lots of questions here.
Yeah, I got two questions. First of all, when you labeled that as an inadequate kitchen or kitchen downstairs, could you explain what you mean by that and what is inadequate? And then also, if we didn't utilize the downstairs, then would it be necessary to have a fire system down there, another sprinkler system? Thank you.
What? And Ernie, if you want to chime in, that's fine. I think the kitchen right now functions as a serving kitchen. You can plug a crock pot in, and you can bring the rolls in, and you can serve chili out of the crock pot into the fellowship hall. But it was originally a cooking kitchen, and because of the fact that it doesn't have an adequate grease trap and other functions, the hood, for cooking, and there's...
And no Ansel system for fire.
Right. That you can't use it for cooking. You can't... The fire department would not allow you to cook hamburgers and cinnamon rolls down there. Okay? Well, okay. So back to your second question, which was, really, do you need a fire sprinkler system in the basement? And the answer really is yes. From a building code perspective, and we're sitting here today, and the fire marshal is not likely to come into your building today and tell you that you need to put a fire sprinkler system in the basement tomorrow. They're not going to impose that, I don't believe. But when we start doing other work, when we enhance the access to a non-code complying space, it starts to become a concern. So I think that if we show an elevator that enhances the access to the basement and to the building officials and the fire officials, that means, oh, now there's 200 people in that basement. It's going to be a concern, and rightfully so, because we want to protect the lives of those that use it. Yes, sir.
I suspect that'll trigger electrical upgrades too. I can't imagine the sanctuary, and matter of fact, a lot of the rooms probably aren't in code compliance.
Well,
So it would trigger that also, wouldn't it?
not, okay. Yeah. From the elevator perspective, we would have to look at the electrical service to see if it needs to be upgraded for the elevator. Holy Trinity, we're upgrading the electrical service. Cheyenne Light Fuel, or whatever they are now, sorry. Cheyenne Light Fuel and Power, they'll always be Cheyenne Light Fuel. Cheyenne Light Fuel and Power provides a certain level of service at no cost, and we were able to work with them on part of the upgrade at Holy Trinity. I would think it would be similar here. One thing that I need to have you understand is that, and it's a bit of a gray area, but if we put an elevator in the building, that doesn't mean that you have to bring the entire building up to code. Okay? The building code allows for alterations, repairs, and even small additions without triggering everything in the building having to come up to the current code. That would be onerous. That would be very difficult and very costly. The gray area is how far do you go, and the code attempts to define this, but how far do you go before it triggers certain things? The things that we pay closest attention to are handicap access and life safety issues, and generally that means fire alarm and fire sprinkler systems. Okay? And again, handicap access is a challenge. Again, how far do you go? How much do you fix? How much are you required to fix? We actually have on the ADA access side, we utilize a consultant in Colorado Springs called Meeting the Challenge that helps us understand those lines of where handicap access needs to be addressed. So we have a great resource there.
What would be involved in bringing the basement kitchen up to working order? Is that possible?
I think it's possible but challenging, and you have a resident here with lots of knowledge about that kitchen. Part of the challenge is the grease trap scenario. Let's go back. I think there are probably 2 or 3 main shortcomings in that kitchen. One is an adequate grease trap. If you are cooking, then the Board of Public Utilities, the Water Department, requires you to trap the grease that comes off of the meat and whatever else you're cooking before it gets into the public sewer system. So you have to put in a grease trap. That grease trap is not this. It's 1,500 gallons. So it's a vault, a concrete vault, that's about 10 feet long, 6 feet high, 6 feet wide, more or less. And it has to be at the discharge level of the sewer. So in order to install one for you, we have to dig below the basement level, wherever the sewer goes out, which is a big challenge. The second piece is that when you are cooking, and the way the code speaks to this is if your cooking operations are creating grease-laden vapors, if you've got steam and splattering grease, you're cooking hamburgers, you're cooking hot dogs, you're broiling chicken, you're cooking pancakes, you're generating grease-laden vapors. Then you have to have a Type 1 hood system, which is the big hood with the self-contained fire protection system that you see in a commercial restaurant. Okay? That could be done. That could be installed in your existing kitchen. But we have to get that grease exhaust all the way up through the roof somewhere, and we have to provide makeup air. So if we're exhausting all of that air out of the kitchen that has the grease-laden vapor in it, I have to bring other air in somewhere else, right? I can't suck it out on one end and not bring something else in on the other. So then I have to have a makeup air system. That makeup air system, again, generates quite a few of its own requirements. And then I think the third question, Mark, is probably electrical. To what extent is the electrical system able to support those functions in the basement? And depending on what kind of equipment you have, the electrical system may very well have to be upgraded. So,
It's maxed out down there.
yeah.
On the opposite side of that, if we were to look at putting in a catering kitchen in the CE wing, what would the requirements there be?
Okay, so a catering kitchen or a warming kitchen where you're not cooking to the extent, you're not cooking hamburgers, right? All of the food has been prepared and you're bringing it in, you're plugging in crock pots and warming equipment of some kind. You may even have stationary in the kitchen a warming oven, right, that you would put rolls into or something. The grease trap may still come into play because the Board of Public Utilities' concern is you bring in the frying pan full of fried chicken, it's already cooked, you haven't cooked it on site, you serve it, and now you sweep out all of that grease and you put it down the drain. So the grease trap probably still comes into play. At the grade level, it's much simpler than what we talked about a minute ago because I don't have to dig 20 feet deep. I dig 6 feet deep. We would have to look at how well the electrical system could support the equipment, so there may still be an electrical upgrade, and there may be an electrical upgrade required by the elevator. I want to come back and talk about the elevator in just a minute because I want to explain type of elevator that we would envision for you. But it would be a much simpler scenario at grade than it is down below. Yeah. Other questions? Yes, back here.
Randy, I'm not sure how to organize this, but what would happen if we took all the second level functions in the C wing and put them in the basement, eliminated the second floor of that CE wing, made it one large space, and make it the fellowship hall, but with a two-story, make it a special space, not just a one-story level. If I'm right, that might eliminate the need for one stop in the elevator at least. Whether that's a cost savings or not, I don't know. But we're going to have to sprinkle the basement anyway, apparently, so why not move the classrooms, the CE wing, and those functions downstairs? Do a really nice fellowship hall where the CE wing is, and that would even allow you the potential to expand that fellowship hall to the south, but that expansion might be an outdoor space, not an indoor space.
Right.
Courtyard, something where functions could happen outside. Any merit to thinking along those lines? Of course, cost is not an issue here, so.
Right. Did somebody make, his name is David Odie, and he said cost is not an issue.
That's right.
Okay, so let's go back to your scenario. Because you brought up something that I failed to mention before. You know, even if we go, see, Ray did teach me something. Even if we were able to go in here and take out partitions and make a larger space footprint, the ceiling is still where it's at, right? If we keep that second floor there. Now, one of the things that we toyed with, an idea that we toyed with last week was, what if we went in and took out the ceiling and exposed the structure? We'd have to do some things with acoustics, but the perception of the space would be of a larger volume. We have to do some more exploring to understand what it would look like, because it needs to be aesthetically appropriate, but that's a possibility. I think, Dave, if we were to go in, my concern is there's a point of diminishing return, right? There's a point where you go in and take that floor out and you get the volume. It'd be a beautiful volume, but how much do we spend to do that versus taking it down in new construction? And that's just something we'd have to look at. The other concern that I have, and moving classrooms into the basement is still a concern. The sprinkler system would absolutely have to happen. But putting children in the basement, and I'm assuming you're talking about a whole variety of age levels, probably, from adult on down. But putting children in the basement in those type of installations is, again, something that I would try not to do, honestly. We can look at it, but we're going to be really vigilant about exiting and fire alarm, and because that's our future, those children, and we got to make sure that they can get out if they need to. So it's a bit of a concern. There's a question here.
My question is if I'm reading these diagrams correctly, we're losing like 3 office spaces. Is there a plan to put offices somewhere else?
There's no plan yet for where they would be, but obviously they need to happen. I think we're taking your office, aren't we, in one of these, in a couple of these scenarios?
That's her office.
Yeah.
That's her office.
We didn't target you specifically. No, and you're absolutely correct. I mean, we're taking out space that's necessary and is currently being utilized. We have to find space for it somewhere else, and we haven't tried to identify that yet. So there's still pieces of the puzzle that aren't in place. Norm, did you have a question too?
Well, obviously the plan here is to make our church more handicap accessible. One of the problems we've always had, we've got like 9 bathrooms and one of them's handicap accessible. It's downstairs. Have we given some thought to how we can make another handicap bathroom somewhere like on the main level that this elevator could work with better, or what's your ideas about that?
Well, my question is which main level? Because you only have about 5 different main levels. But yeah, we've given some very cursory thought towards that, and those look like restrooms right there to me. That looks like a catering kitchen to me. And I'm taking the easy way out, but if that was the direction you wanted to go, I think those kind of spaces could be made to function fairly well for accessible restrooms. You know, the other thing, and I'm going to interject my my personal perspectives on things. My father passed away a couple of years ago, and in his declining year, and it really was about a year, it was a real challenge to help him, not only in the house, but also in the grocery store, in the restaurant, and every place he wanted to still be able to go. And I'm blessed now, a couple of years later, with a little granddaughter that I get to take around. And in both of those cases, getting to restrooms is a challenge. My father, I can help into a men's restroom, but my granddaughter, she's 3 years old now, it's not very comfortable to take her into a men's restroom, and obviously I'm not going into the women's restroom. My point is that if we were going to look in the bigger picture for your church, one of the things that I would hope that we could look at would be a family restroom that would be available, so that if I have to help my mother to the restroom while she's here at services, at worship, that there's a space for me to do that. And if Ernie needs to take his granddaughter to the restroom, there's a space that can be appropriate. Those are the kind of things that I think in any renovation you do, we ought to look for the opportunities to do that.
I'll get to you in a second, Melinda. It's 7 o'clock, and so our plan was this, for us to have this meeting in here until 7, and then to move down into the session meeting room. And if you are not from session, you want to join us in session to hear some more questions from Randy, you're free to join us. But as Randy said, this is an informational meeting. Questions will continue to come up. You could probably spend the next 2 hours here still coming up with questions and debating this, which I don't think you want to do, and session does have some work to do. So before we move down into the session meeting, is there any other last question that want to be addressed here before we move down there? And like I said, the questions can still continue down the session, but who had a, did you have a question, Joe?
Joe had a question.
I can speak. If we're going to deal with accessibility, the basement has to become accessible, or we have to fill it in with concrete and start all over again. We're going to have people that need to go to the basement at some point in time, whether it's fellowship hall, or it's Boy Scouts, or it's a place to store crock pots.
Right.
We're going to need to get to the basement.
Okay.
Let's do this last question or comment, and then we'll move into the session meeting.
Okay, thank you. 2 items. First of all, the church needs a long-range plan on buildings and grounds. Water, handicap access, the education wing. That's 3 items for a long-range plan. Prioritize it and go from there. And 2, we do have a process, especially with the IRMA funds, of application and going through the process all the way up. And it was set up for a good reason to have it looked at, and I would hope that you follow it with everything with this. So it's fascinating, and I look forward to hearing what you do.
I'm going to ask now if we can go on to the meeting now in the session room, and if you're not part of session, want to come down there and hear some more questions and answers from Randy, please do so. If you don't, thank you for coming. Let's give Randy our appreciation for his work that he's done. So,
can we, for those that may not be going to the next, well, for everybody, can we talk about the way forward from here?
Sure, go ahead.
Because I think, as I said, I think we've raised probably more questions than we've given answers for. And honestly, that's where we need to be right now. It's really important from our perspective that we dust off everything and look under the rocks and in the corners and behind the door and figure out where the priorities are and what's really important before we proceed. Like I said, it'd be really easy for us to say, yep, there's the elevator. We'll figure out where the offices go, and that's it. But I want you to help me validate those decisions to make sure that what we do as we move forward is the right thing. Now, I have some handouts of what we've presented here, and I'd be glad to share them with those that are interested. I think we're also going to try to get some of this information, maybe in a consolidated form, into newsletter or onto boards that we put in the fellowship hall or somewhere where people can look at them. And we talked about the potential of getting it online so that you could access it from the church website as well. So this is really just the first step. You see that our sketches are very rudimentary, and that's on purpose because we want to just get you thinking and help you generate ideas as to how this ought to come about. So, okay? I have handouts. I'll be glad to share them. I only brought 20, but if you want to take them, you certainly can. So, okay? Thank you, Randy. Thanks, Randy. You bet.